me know. Now I'm being recorded for posterity. That's always nice. So I'm going to talk a bit about Canadians with disability and the numbers to begin with, and then we'll go into more of the meat of the subject with respect to hiring for ability and some of the considerations when you want to be a more accessible and inclusive employer in order to recruit and retain talent with a disability. I will say, please feel free to ask questions during this session. This is definitely a more comfortable session, I think, simply because the group is more intimate in size. So if there are things you'd like to ask or would like to add, please feel free. I will try to pause at certain points to solicit your input as well. This screen, I am not going to read this slide to you. I think you can, you can read the individual breakdown of numbers there if you wish. The main point here is it's 22% of the Canadian population that self-identifies as having a disability, which is a little more than 1/5. So whether you're looking at this population demographic as a potential market to tap into with respect to the customer-facing part of your business, if that's the kind of business you're running, or looking at it as a potential source of talent and labor to fill your labor shortages and positions, it's part of the population that really can't be ignored. Any business that is ignoring 1/5 of the population is going to miss out on quite a bit of talent as well as a number of potential patrons. So that is the main point in this screen that I would like to draw your attention to. And certainly you see, if you've read through the bullet points there, how those numbers break down a little bit. So in terms of what disability looks like, most of it is invisible. Most disabilities are not somebody in a wheelchair, for instance. I'm, again, not going to read all of these, but the point is these are all people with disabilities, and just looking at them like this, you wouldn't necessarily think that they are somebody with a disability. And I will point out simply the one second from the right, which talks about not accommodating for disabilities, but optimizing for everyone. That is a point that I tend to emphasize at certain points during a number of the trainings that I provide, because when businesses adapt practices and processes to be more accessible or inclusive of people with disabilities, those adaptations tend to produce results that are better for everyone, better for other groups, not just people with disabilities, which results in a more productive and efficient workplace, and a workplace that is more able to get the best out of all of its staff rather than just certain members of the staff team. So when we talk about disability, there are a lot of different types. You see in the little word jumble there, and may I say little, there are a lot of words there. Again, we're not going to read all of them, but even just cursory glance, you see that there are many different types of disabilities. It is affected by time. In particular, what I'll point out is that one of the things to say is those of us who don't self-identify as having a disability now likely will at some point in the future. As we age, disabilities become more prevalent. And of course, there are also episodic and temporary disabilities as well. There's certainly a scale. Some are more severe than others. Some are more moderate or mild. And it is affected by context. When we talk about accommodations, which we will speak about a little bit during this presentation, we're talking about changes in the workplace that may need to be made. And I say may need to be made because not all people with disabilities require accommodations in every workplace. It depends on the workplace and the type of job and the type of disability. So context makes a difference. Again, looking at disability in Canada, this is a perhaps easier to read breakdown of the numbers. Again, you're looking at 20%, 22% of the Canadian population. If you extend that to include close relations, caregivers, families of people with disabilities, the number jumps to 53% of the population that is impacted in one way or another by disability. And certainly when you're talking about the market for a business, that's more than 50% of the marketplace. So again, it pays to be inclusive in more ways than one. When we're talking about hiring people with disabilities, there are a number of statistics that are worth running through. The ones on this screen tend to be the most salient, 72% higher staff retention with higher for people with disabilities, lowering overall turnover. Productivity is not a concern. 90% of employees with disabilities rate average or better on job performance. Attendance is also excellent. 86% of employees with disabilities rate average or better in attendance. And health and safety is not something to be concerned about. I've certainly have heard, had some businesses ask about whether their insurance premiums will go up if they hire people with disabilities. They won't. And in fact, 98% of employees with disabilities rate average or better on safety. The way that these statistics interact, I think, is important. In particular, the way the retention statistic and attendance statistic complement each other. I'm sure as business owners, I don't need to talk to you very much about the costs of high turnover rates and recruitment, as well as the cost of absenteeism in the workplace. So when you combine a 72% higher staff retention with a high level of attendance, then you're going to reduce overhead costs, and that's going to give you more money that you can then actually invest in business operations, growth, innovation, that sort of thing. So in the end, what we're talking about is hiring people with disabilities, providing businesses with a competitive advantage. You see here that 77% of small businesses that have hired people with disabilities say they meet or exceed expectations. I've already talked about retention and productivity. Costs is an important one. Accommodations are something that some businesses worry about, but the reality is only 37% of employees with disabilities require accommodations. And even then, 60% of accommodations cost nothing, and 90% or more are a one-time cost of $500 or less. And it's important to note here when we're talking about accommodations that most accommodations are not for disability at all. Most accommodations are for family, personal, childcare, religious, etc. reasons. And these are things that businesses are very familiar with. Businesses are actually quite familiar with providing accommodations. It's just that accommodations for people with disabilities continues to be spoken about as though it's a matter somehow apart from all others, when it's really not. And as far as capacity goes, the Discoverability Network is here to provide, obviously we're providing this training, but also to facilitate connections with job seekers with disabilities. And you can do that through our online job matching platform, which is free for businesses to use, where you can post roles and have candidates connected or matched to your jobs based on their fit for the role, based on the qualifications that you list, and then away you go, obviously, with your recruitment process. So the first takeaway here is that people with disabilities are a relatively untapped talent pool, but they are ready to work, and there are a great many of them. And Discoverability can connect you to that talent with at no cost. So moving on to what some of the barriers to hiring frequently are. We see that people with disabilities are employed at a lower rate than people without disabilities. When you break down that statistic into different disability groups, the number gets lower. If we're talking about people with intellectual or developmental disabilities or potentially autism, that number drops below 59%. So it's not as straightforward as it seems. Some of the common barriers are attitudes, misconceptions about competency or productivity of job seekers with disabilities in the workplace, or an incorrect assumption about the costs of accommodations. I've quoted this statistic you see on there to you already. Accommodations typically are not prohibitively expensive. It's just that, again, for some reason, it is considered as though it's a matter apart from all other accommodations, when the reality is it's not. And capacity is a more realistic barrier. Many businesses have limited HR functions, especially small to mid-sized enterprises. So they may not necessarily have the functions to help with hiring, training, retention, promotion, adapting processes, and that sort of thing. But that's what we're here for. That's what employment service providers in your community are there for, is to not only support candidates, but also support the business to be able to innovate and create the kinds of inclusive and accessible practices that they need to in order to be successful with hiring and retaining people with disabilities. But the main point is that stigma is the biggest barrier to employment. Generally speaking, it's not an inability to hire people. It's misunderstandings that lead to an assumption that hiring people with disabilities is not a winning proposition when the opposite is true. And again, just think about, if you're going to ignore 20% of the population, we think about the labor shortages in the province and in the country in general, talking about wanting to increase immigration in order to fill those labor shortages, and yet 20% of the population is dreadfully underemployed simply due to misconceptions about their competency or ability to work. So why not work with part of the population that we have in the country before we put all of our hopes in increasing immigration to address our labor shortages? You're probably familiar with the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. I'm not going to spend much time on it because it's boring, but it's also important. It is legal legislation that businesses need to be compliant with. There are 5 standards. Most businesses don't fall under all these standards. The employment standard obviously is going to apply to all businesses, and the customer service standard may as well, depending on how the business operates. So if you are looking for resources on the AODA, visiting the Government of Ontario website is actually a good resource. It will give you an indication as to which elements of the AODA your business is required to be compliant with. And if you are looking for resources to support that, you can go on the Discoverability Network website and you'll find links to resources and tools to support AODA compliance. Now, when we talk about barriers to hiring, moving beyond stigma, some more concrete barriers are mismatches between people with disabilities and the environment or the type of work. And these can take many forms. We talked about, attitudes. This is your stigma. I don't mean you specifically, but, generally speaking, the royal you stigma towards people with disabilities and hiring them. There are also information and communication barriers, misunderstandings in terms of the way the differences that people with disabilities may have and how they communicate. A good example, for instance, is potential lack of eye contact. People with autism, for instance, frequently don't make eye contact. Others may be, lack of social niceties in the workplace. People may simply be very laconic in the way that they respond to questions, and they're less conversational, and that can be taken the wrong way if it's not understood and accepted. Technology can be a barrier. You think of people who require screen readers, people who are low vision or blind, and not everybody who needs a screen reader is completely blind. People with low vision use them as well. So the way text and images are displayed on screen, organizational policies, physical workplace, these are other areas where mismatches can be present. And for those of you who are here at this point, this seems like a good point to pause and ask if you have any questions or thoughts up to this point, or if potentially you can think of, I've given you some examples here of some barriers, if you can think of other barriers that might exist related to organizational policies or the physical workplace. Nobody has any ideas, eh? Well, the physical workplace could be something as simple as somebody who is sensitive to bright lights or has trouble in a shared office environment and therefore requires either noise canceling headphones or to be able to work in an area that is less brightly lit or allowed to wear shades inside. Organizational policies could have something to do with potentially the interview process. If no accommodations are provided for interviews, you may have people who aren't able to present themselves to the best of their ability and as effectively as possible. So the point here is to think of disability as a mismatch between the features of a person's body or the way they experience the world and the features of the environment in which they work. And this is a good definition because we can solve for mismatches, right? We're not looking at solving a medical issue. We're looking at finding a way to match the environment better to the job seeker. And those resolutions, those solutions, are what we call an accommodation. And by providing or changing providing the accommodations or changing processes, it enables a person to do their job effectively. You're not going to hire someone who is not able to do a job, but they may need to do the job differently than other people might do it. So I've already explained why we'd use this definition, right? We don't solve for medical conditions, but we can solve mismatches between the environment and a person. And it's important to note here that accommodations aren't extra. I know it says they allow a person to do their job. I think a more effective definition is that they enable somebody to do a job to the best of their ability. Someone who uses a wheelchair is not going to apply for a job that requires them to do 5,000 jumping jacks a day, and nor would a business hire someone in a wheelchair to do 5,000 jumping jacks a day. That's not what we mean when we say accommodations. We're not talking about making a job possible for somebody who is just not able to do that job. I love astronomy. I do not have the mathematical ability to be an astronomer. There's no accommodation in the world that will enable me to do that job. We're talking about when you're hiring somebody who can do the job, but they require an accommodation in order to be as productive in that job as possible for you. So these are changes to attitudes, processes, or the workplace in general, so that an employee with a disability can perform the core parts of their job, and that standards are not lowered. It's just that things are completed in a different way. Now, in terms of what the job seeker might need, there are a number of different types of accommodations. These are some examples. Again, assumptions could be those attitudinal barriers and the way we communicate, and those two could go together. All right, I mentioned eye contact. Again, people with autism, as an example, frequently don't make eye contact. We live in a culture where eye contact is considered respectful, and if somebody is not making eye contact during the conversation, we might think they're not paying attention, they're not taking it seriously, they're disrespecting us. But that is an assumption based on our cultural norms and the way that we interact with people. But it doesn't mean that if somebody is behaving differently, they're automatically being disrespectful. And again, talking about immigration, and this is where I will make the point, if we are accommodating of people with disabilities and understanding that maybe they don't make eye contact and that's not rude, then we're going to be better at being able to understand and accept people from other cultures into our workplaces, because there are other cultures in the world where eye contact is considered rude. And so people coming from other cultures, some of them, may not make eye contact for that reason. So this is an example of how changing things for people with disabilities can have a positive impact on how a business is able to work with other people from other cultures and other population demographics that they may be hiring from. Again, the way we communicate could also refer, obviously, to presenting information verbally instead of written, or with pictures instead of large amounts of words, which could be great for people with English as a second language. So again, another example of how making changes for people with disabilities can have a more broad impact on others in the workplace. The physical space is another one where accommodations may be required. I mentioned things like bright lights, somebody being allowed to wear shades inside, or a noisy environment in a shared office space, somebody being given maybe a quieter space to work away from the noise as much as possible, or being allowed to wear noise canceling headphones. It could also be something like a sit-stand desk, which is what you see pictured here. And there are a number of offices that have moved to providing sit-stand desks as a standard operating procedure, simply because, as any of us who sit at computers for most of the day know, that's just bad for your back. And so if people are able to stand up and work, they're probably going to take fewer breaks, because they won't need to get up and walk around in order to stretch their back and relieve that pain. But for somebody with an actual, a serious diagnosed back problem that can't be sitting for 8 hours a day, the sit-stand desk definitely allows them to remain productive. If the sit-stand desk cannot be provided, it may simply be an understanding that, at 5 minutes at the top of every hour, they need to get up and move around a little bit. Organizational barriers are other ones, right? Hiring processes, the way we conduct interviews and job postings haven't changed in a long time. And as someone who has conducted a number of interviews, as well as obviously being in a number of interviews, I don't know that the standard interview process necessarily allows us to make the most informed decisions about who to hire. I mean, that's always going to be a challenge, but for those of us that have been in a lot of interviews and are used to a number of the standard questions, it can become not so difficult to game the process. And so as an employer, if you want to make the most informed decision about who to hire, it's good to have a flexible and adaptable interview process so that whoever you're interviewing can present themselves as most effectively as possible. Otherwise, you're just going to be hiring the person who is able to present themselves as effectively as possible in the one traditional interview format that we use. Same thing with job postings. Usually they list a lot of unnecessary qualifications that aren't actually required for the job. As an example, almost every job I have ever had says that I need a driver's license. I don't have a driver's license, and every employer I have ever worked for has been very happy for me, including when I worked in construction, where you would definitely think I need a driver's license, but no, I just needed to be able to get where I had to be on time. Now, sometimes that meant being in Newmarket by 8 in the morning. And if you're taking public transit, that means I was leaving before 4 in the morning to get to work on time. And that wasn't fun with my 70-pound bag of tools and being not a morning person. But nevertheless, I did it. So again, the kind of processes we use, the way we're willing to adapt them can address some of these organizational barriers. Accommodation costs, I've spoken about this. I do want to highlight here that there's a return of $28.69 for every dollar invested in accommodations. And that makes sense when you think of the increased productivity, as well as the fact that people are more likely to remain on the job if they are happy in the job and if they are able to be productive, because they're going to be a more valued member of the workplace. So that statistic makes a good amount of sense. And you see some other stats around here. We've been through some of them, so I don't need to dwell on the point, I don't think. Now, when it comes to disclosure, this is important when we are talking about accommodations, because people with disabilities need to feel comfortable disclosing, and there needs to be an environment in which they can disclose. And this is when somebody discloses that they have a disability or a health condition, and that they may ask for changes in the workplace so they can perform the primary part of their job. And of course, the changes are the accommodations. The important thing to note here is that the disclosing is not sharing the diagnosis or the details of the health condition. So somebody may share that they have a disability, but they don't have to share what that disability is. The reality of the matter is simply that they're sharing they have a disability, and as a result of that disability, they need an accommodation in a certain area of the workplace. And then as an employer, it's your duty to accommodate, but you also choose the accommodation. Generally, somebody will have suggestions of the type of accommodation they need. You don't have to give them their preferred accommodation, but you're going to want to give them an accommodation that works so that they can work for you. So as an example, taking someone who is working in a shared office space that has trouble focusing because of all the noise, their preferred accommodation may be to have a private office, but there may not be a private office available for them, in which case maybe you allow them to wear noise canceling headphones on the job and provide those for them. Or maybe there's a space, towards the back of the room or something where it's less noisy. So it's not the preferred accommodation, but it's an accommodation that addresses the primary concern. So when somebody discloses is up to them, and whether they choose to disclose, right? Not every person with a disability requires an accommodation in every job, and disability changes. Somebody may be working in a job and not require an accommodation, something may change, and then they may need to request an accommodation later. What the person is disclosing is, again, that they have a disability or a health condition, but they don't have to provide documentation, they don't have to provide proof, and they don't have to state what the health condition or disability is. And as an employer, it's important that you ask only for job relevant information. Right? You're not their doctor or anything like that. What you need to know is, what do they need in order to perform the job as well as possible? What do they need in order to be a productive employee for you? And then that is what you're accommodating for. And that will then be a win-win situation. Obviously, you're going to need to know how to create a safe environment for people to disclose. 60%, say they're unwilling to disclose any information related to disability for fear of negative consequences. So one of the things you can do with respect to that, I know it says assure the individual that this information will be kept confidential. You should do that. It's also legally required that you keep the information confidential. So that's one's pretty straightforward. But a lot of businesses will have statements about accommodations being available potentially in their job postings or in their job offer letters. But this may be the language in the AODA, and the language in the AODA is legalistic language. Again, it's sort of boring, dry. It's not personable. It may not sound sincere. So one of the things that can be helpful is in including throughout the entire recruitment process statements that the business is happy to make accommodations to ensure that people are able to be as successful as possible, accommodations for the interview, accommodations on the job, and then don't just include them in the job postings and the welcome letters or the offer letters, but when you're actually speaking to candidates, ask them if they require an accommodation. And again, this can be beneficial for people who don't have a disability. Remember, most accommodations are not for disability. So somebody in the workplace, if you're hiring somebody and you just make it a standard practice to, during the orientation process, to ask them, obviously when it's just you and them, so it's confidential, are there any accommodations you might need in order to be successful in the workplace? It gives them a welcome opportunity to bring it up. Same thing during interviews. Ask people if they need any accommodations to present themselves most effectively during the interview, and then people may have feel more comfortable to say, well, yes, actually, if I had the questions in advance, or if I can respond in a written fashion as opposed to verbally, or verbally instead of written, or whatever it may be, so that you can make the most effective assessment of who the best candidate is. But including these conversations throughout the hiring process is going to be better for everyone. We know there are a number of different learning styles out there, which is why some people may require accommodations for interviews, whether they have a disability or not. We also are aware that there are different ways to do things, and everybody tends to have their own way of doing things. And so obviously the work in the workplace needs to get done in the end result needs to be completed in a certain way. But how that end result is obtained and the way people do their work could be different from one staff person to the next. An example here is, and this has nothing to do with disability, I worked in a shoe store in retail for about 5 years in my early 20s. And I, at the time, was not so gregarious, not so extroverted, and I preferred to be in the stock room. I am very good with organizing spaces, and we had small stock rooms with a large amount of stock. And having organized stockrooms meant that we could make more sales because we could find the products faster in order to serve more customers in a short period of time. We also had a floor manager who was very good at interacting with customers, at managing staff on the floor and that sort of thing. And so what the owner did is she allowed me to spend 70% of my time in the stock room, organizing stock, putting stock away, making sure we had more space for new orders and that sort of thing, while the floor manager spent 70% of his time on the floor, managing staff out there, interacting with customers and doing sales and all of that. And when we overlapped in our responsibilities, that other 30% of the time was when the store was either excessively busy, so I needed to be on the floor, or there was so much to do in the stock room that I just couldn't do it on my own. And these accommodations weren't really asked for. The owner knew what our strengths were, and so she simply said, go ahead and do it this way as long as everything gets done. And the store ran like a well-oiled machine until the other manager left, and then I had to spend a lot more of my time on the floor as the floor manager. But that is what it is. But for 2 years there, we had a store where the stock rooms were extremely organized. It was easy to find products, easy to serve customers. We had very efficient management on the floor, interacting with customers, and that was simply playing to her employees' strengths. So again, it's a good example of how accommodations, not even necessarily having anything to do with disability, can improve the productivity in the workplace. So the value of disclosure when it comes to providing a welcoming environment for people to do that is that people are generally going to work at their best, as well as be more comfortable and become more integrated into the workplace when they feel like they are able to be authentic. They're able to be themselves unreservedly and don't have to act like something else. I know it says accommodations let the person do their job. The more important point is the accommodations allow a person to do their job to the best of their ability, which means they're as productive as possible for you. Again, they may enhance productivity, right? So you're going to hire somebody who can do the job. Maybe they can make do without an accommodation and get things done, well enough. But with an accommodation, they can get things done much better. The flexibility keeps you nimble. So I've given you an example here of how being flexible, providing accommodations can be beneficial for people not just with disabilities. So if your business practices involve being more flexible, then you're going to be more likely to be able to adjust and adapt in order to make the most of your workforce. And better planning and resources to provide appropriate support means that you're going to be positioned better to respond to disclosure and provide accommodations. So you want to welcome disclosure, you want to welcome those conversations and be comfortable with them. Right. I mean, I've been in that position. I know I've had, going to someone and asking, is there, do you need an accommodation? Is there's something that, you'd like to share with me that, about what's going on. Those are not easy things to do, and you want to be careful. You're not going to just walk up to somebody and say, "Hey, do you have a disability?" That's not appropriate. But I think of the positions that I've been in when I've had staff that, obviously there was some, there were performance issues, but I didn't want to assume that it was simply that they didn't want to do their job. And I can think of a couple of them who, when I had the opportunity to speak to them privately, I said to them, I know that, I know that you can perform to a high standard and you're a really valued part of this team, but there also, I see that there are some challenges with your performance. Is there something that, do you need an accommodation of one kind or another? Is there anything we could do to support you to be more successful? And one of them told me no, and she just said, I just, need to do this better myself. And actually she did improve. But another one told me, she disclosed about certain things related to childcare and whatnot that were a hindrance for her, and there were accommodations that she could need, which would be helpful. So again, just welcoming those conversations. So the second takeaway here is that the most important thing you need to know about a person with a disability in the workplace is if they need any changes or adjustments, and if so, what those are. And then you make that accommodation and you end up with staff that is more productive as well as more satisfied in your workplace. Now, if you want to use the Discoverability Network to connect to talent, you see our website on the screen there. Our online job matching platform is free for you to use. The landing page does not look like what it is in the screen here. Our website was updated very recently, so we have a shiny new website. But creating an employer profile is easy and straightforward. You can start posting jobs, and then job seekers will be matched to your roles based on fit and preference. Fit in as much as you'll specify skills, work experience, education history, whatever you're looking for, and job seekers will be matched based on overlap between what you're looking for and what they have. But also preference in as much as job seekers will state the industries or sectors they're interested in working in, and those are the sectors and industries they'll be matched to jobs in. So anybody who's matched to one of your jobs, you can be certain that they are interested. If you would like a roadmap to hiring and retaining talent that goes through a number of different steps and provides tools and resources along the way to support your success, then you can go to our website and check out our roadmap. It's developed by my colleague, Lisa Kelly, and provides a number of good resources through the different steps you see on the screen there in order to support recruiting and retaining job seekers with disabilities. And again, that's free for you to use. And that is the end of the workshop, the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, I would obviously welcome them right now. And certainly you're welcome to get in touch with us if you think of any questions or have anything you'd like to talk about following up on this workshop. However, I'll stop sharing my screen. And if you have any questions or any thoughts, I would welcome you to share them now.
Well, thank you so much, Donald. I know from my standpoint, the right off the top offering that we're happy to make accommodations to provide a positive and effective work environment is something that I hadn't really considered putting into sort of our proposition when we're putting out staff postings. I think that would be something that would set us off on the right foot right from the top. So I never thought of it. So thank you for suggesting it.
Pleasure. Always nice when there are some tangible takeaways.
Absolutely. The other one is obviously not asking if as someone has a disability, but offering the accommodations if there's something that we can help to improve their workspace or their work environment. I think that could work for everyone, obviously. And as you said, it doesn't have to only apply to a disability. Someone may say that they need, the noise canceling headphones, like you said, or maybe, a later start would be really helpful for me so I could get my kids to school. I could stay later to make up the same time. So you're still getting the same effective time, but you're accommodating. And I love the phrase accommodating just because it is so overreaching and it applies to all staff in general.
Yep, it absolutely does. And I'm glad that that point got through. I did see there was a question in the Q&A there about what the second website was. I'm assuming that was referring to the roadmap, so I put it in the Q&A as an answer. I'll put it in the chat as well. Can I send? And no, I can only send the chat to hosts and panelists. So I'm assuming everybody can see what I put in the Q&A. Thank you. Okay, so I guess yeah.
Everyone?
Yeah, I think I think so. But yes, I think it sounds like sounds like what I said makes sense to you, Trisha. Hopefully it makes sense to everyone. I'm glad people are going to check out the roadmap. It is a very useful tool. Lisa did a great job developing it. Is there anything that anyone else would like to know, or any questions anyone has? Can we have access to your slides? Sure, yeah, I can send a PDF of the slide deck to Trisha and she can share it with everybody, I think.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to.
Okay, so I will happily do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Madeline.
Hi, Tracy. Yeah, I really enjoyed the presentation. Thank you. It's so important, and we never seem to make enough space, for these kinds of discussion. Thank you very much, Donald. Is there a way to maybe even promote success stories or promote companies, that can say how it's worked for them, Yeah.
Now, when you say promote, do you mean be connected to, or so you're saying, if you do it successfully, should you promote that? I just want to make sure I understand the question.
Yeah, I don't know, just a place where they can share, I think, even amongst each other. I don't know, maybe so many employers do make accommodations, and they've just done them, and
Yep.
there's no real recognition for it. Like they don't get a star, on their on their storefront or whatever. I don't know if there's if it was known more, I think more companies or more businesses would not shy away from saying, oh no, I don't want to get into any of these, hiring anybody with disabilities or that could possibly need accommodations, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. In terms of promoting, we do recommend promoting success for doing this, and there are a few reasons. One is, you make a good point there that it sets well, so it sets an example for others, really, right?
Mhm.
More places will be more inclined to get on board and see that it's possible when they see that other businesses like them are successful with it. But it is also something that is useful for when you think of that 53% of the population being impacted by disability in one way or another, whether because they identify as being a person with a disability or somebody they know, family or close relation or friend does. Um,
Mhm.
One of the statistics you can see out there is that I think it's 87% of people prefer to give their business to companies or businesses that are inclusive. And
Mhm.
so promoting that success means you're more likely to have a larger customer base or attract those people who either themselves or people they know have disabilities. So we recommend promoting simply because it's likely to grab more business, which is never a bad thing, right? So
Right.
in terms of promoting, I mean, you can promote within the business community. I mean, within the Barrie Chamber, right? It's something that I think members could probably talk about at some of your meetings. I've never been to your meetings. I don't know what they're all like, but I imagine members have the chance to speak. So certainly, I think that would be an opportunity to promote success, which gets more to Madeline, what you talked about with the whole setting example aspect. But also, LinkedIn is a great place. There are a lot of people on LinkedIn. A lot of them are job seekers or employees with disabilities. So promoting some of your success on there, and your standard social media places where your business may have a presence. Lots of businesses have Facebook pages, maybe Twitter, YouTube, whatever it may be. I don't know what promoting on YouTube would be like. I'm not really. I don't know. I guess you
Mhm.
could make a video, but
Mhm.
I think Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, where you can actually put something up saying, showing what some of your successes have been, is a good way to promote it because it's going to get out to a broad community. Anybody who's following the hashtags you use or is following your page is going to see that. So that's one way.
Yeah, there's the stigma is so strong. Like I work in employment, and we can work with the client for, for a number of months, we can suspect something, but before they feel comfortable to disclose, and then how we can help employers, with the mismatches, to create good fit, yeah, the stigma is very strong. Yeah,
Yeah, it is, and
yeah.
so
And the more people have been discriminated against and stigmatized, the more profound it is for them, and mhm, yeah.
no, you're absolutely right. And so the more that success is promoted, the more that people are going to see that most businesses are open to this and want to be accessible and inclusive, which I think is the case.
Yeah,
So promoting
yeah.
promoting can only help reinforce that.
Well, congratulations to the Ontario Chamber of Commerce.
Oh, well, thanks. I'll be sure to share that with my superiors.
Yeah.
So Donald, if you wouldn't mind just telling everyone about our second session on March 22nd, that would be fantastic.
Yes, yes. Let's make sure that I have the right workshop here. I believe that is going to be the roadmap. Yes, it is. So yeah, March 22nd, we are actually going to do a workshop that goes through the roadmap to hiring that I put the link for in the Q&A there. And we'll go through step by step each element of the roadmap, some of the resources and tools that are associated with it, and the considerations that businesses would make every step of the way as they're going through that roadmap to hiring and retaining talent with a disability.
And of course, that registration is on the Barrie Chamber website, so barriechamber.com. Just go on to our calendar under events and you'll be able to register there.
Great. Well, I hope that we'll see you all again in a couple weeks then.
Thank you everyone for coming today, and thank you, Donald, for presenting for us.
Oh, my pleasure. I look forward to seeing you in a couple weeks. You're welcome, Gabriella, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your week and have a wonderful weekend when it arrives.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.